So, welcome to another episode of the Mind Takeaway podcast. We are joining you from a Roman amphitheatre in the wonderful city of Saintes in France.
Yeah, we decided to record it here because it's so quiet. It's a beautiful day. It's sunny, but not too hot. You can probably hear birds around us, and we're hoping to have a good sound.
And I think this place was built around 40 AD. So it's pretty old, has a lot of history. Apparently there was a lot of executions here, a lot of gladiator and animal fights, so it was pretty brutal. But right now, I mean, we'll share some pictures when we launch this episode, but it's so tranquil, it's beautiful. In fact, it's been raining so much about a month ago that the amphitheatre at the very bottom is actually, we're looking at a lake.
Yeah, we cannot go at the bottom.
Sorry, it's quite beautiful, but we can't go into the very bottom because it looks quite deep. And we were told very nicely by the amphitheatre staff here not to go all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, not to swim.
We had to promise that we wouldn't swim. So for this episode, we wanted to explore the topic of feedback. I know we've probably tackled this topic a few times over the years. And more recently, a lot of our clients, a lot of incubators, accelerator programs, people have approached us to talk about this topic. But in this one, we're going to talk about, in leadership, the value of getting comfortable and getting a good foundation and preparing to actually receive feedback.
Yeah. So it isn't about leaders giving feedback, but asking for feedback, receiving feedback from their team, from people that are working in the same organization. So either in a same level as them or employees. So the first question, I guess, to start with is, why are we doing this? Why should we do that? And maybe just a little background, why are we doing this is because one of the things that we ask founders, co-founders, leaders when you start working with them is to ask their staff for feedback so that they can see what are some of the most important things for them to work on, and that sometimes is the starting point of our conversation. Not always, sometimes when it makes sense. So why is this feedback so important? So the question is, why would you ask for feedback? What are the benefits of it? Because it is, quite uncomfortable to start.
Yeah, I guess why it's a good place to start. Well, it's really good because you need information, you need data. And quite often, I know in my career, and I know that when we support leaders, you can easily be blind to what's going on. Sometimes we can get complacent. Other times we just forget that we have a wonderful team and they can let us know if we're doing a good job, but also there's always a lot of room for improvement. But that's not a negative. It's just that if your team get comfortable giving you developmental feedback, as we label it, it's not positive or negative. It's just an opportunity to develop, grow and learn. And if you can look at being the receiver of feedback using that lens, then you're more likely to get some really valuable information, and that can be quite often actionable, where you can make some changes and improve things. Also, the other reason for why would you want to receive feedback is because the more that I asked my team back in the day, or teams I was leading, how was I doing? What can we change? Is there anything you would like me to do differently? That kind of thing. I got to know these individuals on my team at a more deeper and more granular level. So that's also a really useful thing, that If you're going back and forth between each other, exchanging feedback, then you're more likely to get to know each other really well. And you get to know how people tick, what they like, what they don't like, what kind of triggers them. Because we were talking to a wonderful young founder a few days back, and it was a really good reminder about not all feedback is actionable. You might not agree with all the feedback, but that's okay too. And I think that's a good segue into the next part.
One of the things that we notice that happens within the companies where leaders are open to feedback is that it increases engagement. It shows that you're listening to people. It shows that you're open to ideas. It fosters collaboration. It creates this good culture of transparency, trust, and good communication.
Yeah, it's a good return on investment, because where we see organizations being uncomfortable with feedback in general, some of the leaders are not, they're avoiding feedback, for example, there's definitely more money spent and there's course correction required, because people might leave the team, they might leave the company because they feel like they're not supported. The other added benefit of why would you want to receive feedback is because when you've built trust, and we'll come on to this in a minute, and you have transparency and people feel comfortable around you in the team and safe to give you feedback in the first place, asking for feedback means that you are actually being a good role model. You are role modeling great leadership, because you're listening to your team, you're asking them for information, you're openly wanting to collaborate and ask what can be done differently, how can I change, what can I improve, and also what would you like me to do more of, because it's not always developmental. You could be doing a great job, and it's actually really important that if you're doing a great job, that you understand what you're doing really well and what the team really love and really value versus what they don't like necessarily.
Some of the big no's when it comes to asking for feedback. As we said, asking for feedback can bring about transparency and improving relationships and connection with the people, building trust with the people in your organization. However, if you already don't have trust, if you are micromanaging, if people are not happy, genuinely happy, that can actually cause more rift if not done in a proper way. If you're new to your company or you are part of a new team, you might want to wait until you get to know them a little bit better in order to ask for feedback.
Yeah, that's a valid point, that if you're new to the company or you've just joined the team or you've moved into a different department, then asking for feedback after a week is probably not the best idea. It's no one's gonna die, but the thing is, you need to get to know people well. You need to build trust and transparency and respect. And it does take a bit of time. It can take months to develop that. So it's probably better, rather than jumping into feedback, to explore your expectations with the team, for example, before you get into that. And then you can develop a culture of feedback before you ask for it. One example Mira and I were talking about this morning is, I'm laughing now, but it was quite traumatic at the time. I was in a leadership offsite and we were having relatively a good day, even though there had been the backstory, there were some challenges in our team. Also, more senior managers we were not getting on with. There were some challenges. So I know for me, I didn't feel so psychologically safe. A lot of the feedback was being ignored. And interestingly, we had regional directors who came in, barged in and said, right, we are going to give each other feedback and tell each other what we like, what we don't like, but we were put on the spot so quickly, we didn't have time to think about it and reflect. And crucially, we weren't given a choice. And the people in the wider team didn't ask permission. So although I was relatively okay with it, because in my career, I have been pretty straightforward, honest with people and transparent, but quite often a lot of my colleagues in this team were very uncomfortable because they didn't feel safe enough that they could give quality feedback, something actionable. So it ended up being, if I'm honest, bullshit, because we ended up being quite uncomfortable and put on the spot. And I would say 90% of the feedback on that day was just blowing smoke off people's asses, cheerleading, saying stuff because they felt forced to say it. So it wasn't really of high quality or really actionable. And maybe some of it wasn't even the truth. It was a really good example. I'll never forget it, because I made a reminder that day that I wouldn't force feedback on people like that. And actually, a few weeks later, I did give feedback to those same senior managers. And funny enough, sadly, it was badly received. So, hey ho, what can you do? But I tried.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I'm hearing here as well is, you said lots of the feedback was just positive, and there was nothing else actionable, nothing constructive. And so one of the things to a red flag to when you are receiving feedback, if you're asking for feedback and you're receiving feedback that it's all positive, it's a red flag that people are not psychologically safe to give that feedback. It might be because of some of your actions in the past. It might be because you still haven't developed any relationships because you're new, and the other red flag is hearing nothing when asking for feedback, not getting any response. So
yeah, when there's silence, that's usually a good sign that you need to make some improvements. It might not be something so serious or catastrophic. Maybe the team just feels uncomfortable that week, that month. Lots of challenges that are external, that might be outside of your control, might limit the amount of feedback you're receiving. There might be something company-wide that's been done and the team just don't feel comfortable, and they might be angry or not happy with the way things are going, and that can end up stopping you from receiving feedback. So what I would always suggest, which I did in my career and what we instill in leaders when we do leadership development, we train or coach leaders, is to get super curious about what's really going on. And I wouldn't say nosy, but, with permission and when people are comfortable, like we've talked about, check in as often as you can. Check in every month in the one-to-ones, but also you don't need to wait a month. You can come in and say to people, hey, how is it going? How are you doing today? Which I find a really impactful thing to do. And quite often when I suggest to leaders that they do that, they're like, well, but it gets personal. But I would say quite often when we get personal, when we connect at a human level, you'd be surprised how well it connects to the nitty gritty of business as well. Because it brings down barriers and people are more relaxed to tell you what's happening, rather than, I think the next bit we can go into is when we label feedback. So, I don't know if you've seen the film Fight Club, but like Fight Club, we don't talk about Fight Club. It's the same with feedback. It's better not to go in and say, hey, I'm going to give you feedback today, because even if it's something really impactful and the person's going to really benefit from it, you've already put the barriers up. People might get uncomfortable because the word carries certain weight and can cause fear and stress and anxiety and all the rest of it. So what we would suggest, and again, I don't want to give you exact words, you'll do it in your unique way, but it's better to say, hey, how has it gone? What's the last 3 months been like? How have you been doing in this month? Is there anything I can support you with? How did you think I did? This kind of thing. And then riffing on that, going back and forth and really listening to understand. I think that's a good way of collecting really high quality data and feedback, right?
yeah, so I guess the next step would be, once you've collected feedback, and how do you ask for feedback? Make it light, make it easy. Don't make it too serious. Don't scare people. If maybe on the beginning when you start doing it, maybe do it as an anonymous feedback, and then follow up with actions, because one of the big no-nos when it comes to asking for feedback is asking for feedback and then doing nothing about it. one of the things Peter said earlier is, sometimes you'll get ambiguous feedback. Sometimes you will get feedback that you won't agree with. Sometimes it will be contradictory. So with all these things, now you have a space, a material to go back to people, and in your one-to-ones have conversations about it. What did you mean by that? Is it always like this? Is it in some situations? What actions can I take from it, or what actions would you expect from me to take from it? And stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a valid point, that if you're going to ask for feedback in the first place, and you, as we've talked about, as we've explored, you've built solid foundations where people feel safe enough to give you feedback and you're getting good quality. It's exactly that, to circle back, to show that you've really listened to the feedback and you're willing to take some actionable steps from the feedback and make some changes. And again, sometimes it requires, as Mira said, to check in and say, what did you mean by this? But doing it in a non-threatening way, in a purely curious way, to make some improvements and double checking. Because quite often the amount of times when I would read feedback from my team, and I'd be like, whoa, I don't agree with that. But quite often, although it might have triggered me, or I might feel a little bit uncomfortable, or I might disagree, I would circle back and say, can I ask you a bit more about this? Because thank you, this has been great feedback, but I wasn't sure how I could action this. Can I ask you a bit more? And quite often when I checked in and when I asked more questions and I got more information back, quite often what I thought was the feedback was completely different. And again, we all have a different version of reality. We all see things differently. That's the rich diversity of everyone in the team. So it's always worth checking when you get that feedback in written form, especially if you're not really sure, you're not 100% what you can action from it. Sometimes it's worth circling back. And just to be clear, not everything you need to action and go back on. You will, when you get really good at receiving feedback and you're comfortable with your team, you'll know people in the team, or it just isn't actionable, for example, or it could be received because someone was not feeling safe, or there was a certain thing going on where the team is in high stress. So, they might have knee-jerked and said something, no judgment, but you know why they did what they did, and you know why they behaved the way they did. Because this is the thing, if you don't really understand how to track your team's behavior, then that can be quite challenging to receive feedback and know what to do with it.
And I think one of the things that is also good to mention is that if you want high quality of feedback from the people you're working with, from your team, you need to lead by example. You need to give high quality feedback. And so in this whole circle of feedback, you will get better at giving feedback, because you will learn what wasn't good from what they gave to you. And also they will get better because they will learn from you in how you are giving feedback. So
yeah, and lastly, just to end, it is uncomfortable receiving feedback and asking for it in the first place. I know that if you're not used to receiving feedback and you may be new in the role of leadership or managing people, have that responsibility of, for example, having direct reports, it does get easier. That's the good news. The more that you're willing to lean into being a bit vulnerable and asking people what they think of you and your performance and how you've led, then you will get incrementally more comfortable, where you'll be able to feel safe to action that feedback, and it takes a bit of time. So just keep at it. So I hope this has been useful. As always, thank you for listening.
And if you would like to be better at receiving feedback, giving feedback, if you want to create a culture of feedback in your company, we are here to help. Feel free to reach out to us and ask any questions that you may have.